Hi everyone, our planet has been home to an array of fascinating animals over the millennia. While some have endured to this day, others have unfortunately gone extinct. However, extinction doesn't have to be the end. Thanks to ongoing scientific breakthroughs, we may soon be able to bring back species like the mammoth or the saber-toothed tiger. Curious to see what these ancient creatures might look like in the future? Let's take a look. Siberian unicorn. Most of us probably grew up believing unicorns are just mythical creatures, beautiful white horses with a single glowing horn. But let's set the record straight. The real unicorn looked very different. Believe it or not, this bizarre animal actually existed. It lived in Eurasia and was a prehistoric relative of today's rhinoceros. And yes, it had one horn. Scientists call it the Siberian unicorn, and based on the latest research, it went extinct only around 26,000 years ago. That's recent enough that it could easily be the inspiration behind all those ancient legends about magical one-horned beasts. But here's the wildest part. The bones that have been found are so well preserved that theoretically, we could bring the Siberian unicorn back to life. No one's trying to extract its DNA just yet, but the possibility is there, and it might not be that hard to make this incredible creature walk the earth again. Irish elk. Remember Thranduil's majestic elk from The Hobbit? Or maybe it was a deer. The internet's still debating exactly what kind of magical creature that was. But honestly, the name doesn't matter nearly as much as the fact that science might soon bring something very similar back to life. Meet the Irish elk, also known as the Irish deer, an extinct species of giant deer that once roamed the earth. And no, this isn't just some fantasy dreamed up by Peter Jackson's animation team. These creatures were very real, and they were absolutely massive. The Irish elk stood out for its sheer size, and most famously, its enormous antlers, spanning up to 13 feet, around 4 meters, from tip to tip. With headgear that extravagant, it's no surprise they struggled to survive once forests started to replace open grasslands. Dense woods just weren't ideal for carrying around a portable crown. Luckily, scientists have discovered plenty of well-preserved remains, and since modern deer like the fallow deer are their distant descendants, reviving this giant is more science than science fiction. So hey, in a few years, you might be able to channel your inner Thranduil. No elven royalty required. And speaking of ancient giants, mammoth. Of course, we can't talk about bringing ancient animals back to life without mentioning the ultimate Ice Age icon, the mammoth. When most people think of extinct creatures, these shaggy prehistoric elephants are usually the first that come to mind. The good news, mammoth remains are discovered fairly often, and many are in surprisingly good condition. That means there's real hope scientists will be able to recover usable genetic material. In fact, several labs around the world are already working to isolate mammoth DNA. The most promising source might be the preserved tissue found in frozen specimens, and the plan is to use a female African elephant as a surrogate mother for the first mammoth of the 21st century. Meanwhile, in Yakutia, a region in Siberia, scientists have been preparing for a possible mammoth revival for over 20 years. They're working to restore the ecosystem known as the Mammoth Steppe, an ancient landscape full of grasses and cold-hardy plants that once supported huge herds of these giants. Interestingly, when mammoths disappeared, many of those plants vanished too. Researchers hope that by reintroducing mammoths, we might also bring back the rich prehistoric flora that once thrived in the far north. Ground sloth. At first glance, you might think the bones of this creature belonged to some kind of prehistoric bear, but nope, it was actually a sloth. A very big sloth. These giant ground sloths could grow up to 20 feet tall, about 6 meters, and roamed the earth until around 8,000 years ago. The last of them lived in South America, where they often clashed with native peoples. Most scientists believe that human hunters played a major role in their extinction. Unlike today's tree-dwelling sloths, these giants were slow and had nowhere to hide, making them easy targets. But here's the exciting part. We found tons of well-preserved remains, including bones and even skin. While extracting DNA from them is tough, it's not impossible. The bigger issue? Today's sloths are tiny in comparison, especially the females, so they're not exactly ideal surrogates for bringing these giants back. Still, with advances in science, researchers are optimistic they'll figure something out in the future. Saber-toothed cat. So we've talked about the sloth and the mammoth. Now to complete the Ice Age crew, we just need a saber-toothed cat, or saber-toothed tiger if you prefer. And honestly, when you see the size of those fangs, you might start to wonder if bringing this beast back is really such a great idea. But for scientists, saber-toothed cats are actually pretty solid candidates for de-extinction. First off, they went extinct fairly recently, around 11,000 years ago. Second, their fossils are often incredibly well preserved, thanks to the cold environments they lived in. And most importantly, well, they're just plain cool. Jokes aside, saber-toothed cats are considered one of the most fascinating predators that ever walked the earth. Though, to be fair, our ancestors probably wouldn't have shared that enthusiasm. After all, back then, reviving something that wanted to eat you wasn't exactly a popular idea. The dodo, famous to many from Alice in Wonderland, was once a real bird. Though it lived in just one place on Earth, the island of Mauritius, located east of Madagascar in the Indian Ocean. First described by a Dutch expedition in 1598, the dodo disappeared shockingly fast. By 1662, it was essentially extinct. There was no ice age, no dramatic environmental catastrophe. The problem? Dodos couldn't fly, and in their peaceful island habitat, they didn't need to. They had no natural predators, so when humans arrived along with rats, pigs, and dogs, the defenseless and curious dodos became easy prey. In just a few decades, they were wiped out. Over time, the dodo became a symbol of extinction itself, most notably adopted by the Durrell Wildlife Conservation Trust, where a statue of the bird now stands at the entrance to their wildlife park. But there's hope. Scientists today have well-preserved skeletons and remains of the dodo, giving them a possible path to extract DNA. If the right technology and conditions come together, this odd, flightless bird might just waddle its way back into existence someday. Let's talk about the aurochs, a massive wild bull and the ancestor of all modern cattle. These beasts once roamed the forests and grasslands of the Eastern Hemisphere, but were declared extinct back in 1627, mostly due to overhunting and habitat loss. But their story doesn't end there. Despite being gone for almost 400 years, the DNA of today's cattle still carries traces of the original aurochs. Back in the 1920s and 30s, German scientists tried to recreate the aurochs by selectively breeding hardy cattle breeds. The result? Heck cattle. A tough, rugged breed, but one that didn't quite match up to the size and spirit of the real thing. Now, a new generation of scientists is taking another shot. In the Netherlands, the Tauros project is crossbreeding primitive European cattle to produce animals that closely resemble the original aurochs in looks, size, and behavior. Meanwhile, in Poland, researchers are working with preserved aurochs DNA from ancient bones to potentially clone the species directly. So don't be surprised if, in the near future, you see modern fields populated not just with cows, but with something much wilder, something straight out of the distant past, the mighty aurochs. Passenger pigeon. In the 19th century, the skies above North America were filled with billions of passenger pigeons, their massive flocks blocking out the sun. Yet, their incredible numbers couldn't save them from extinction. Overhunting and deforestation wiped them out, and by 1914, the last known passenger pigeon, Martha, died at the Cincinnati Zoo. Now, more than 100 years later, a team of scientists at Revive and Restore is on a mission to bring the species back to life. By studying the band-tailed pigeon, a species that shares much of its genetic makeup, researchers are working to alter its DNA to mimic the lost traits of the passenger pigeon, including its size, appearance, and migration behavior. If successful, the modified embryo will be incubated in a viable egg, allowing this extinct bird to take flight once again. Steller's sea cow. This incredibly massive marine animal, measuring over 26 feet long and nearly 20 feet around, was first discovered in 1741 by the expedition of Vitus Bering off the coast of Russia's Commander Islands. Known as Steller's sea cow, it was a gentle giant closely related to today's manatees and dugongs. But tragically, by 1768, just 27 years later, Steller's sea cow was completely wiped out, hunted to extinction by humans. It was large, slow, and utterly defenseless, making it an easy target for sailors and seal hunters in need of food. Scientists today believe that if this species had survived into modern times, it could have become the world's first domesticated marine animal. It was docile, social, and had no fear of humans. traits that would have made it ideal for coexistence. But here's the exciting part. Hope isn't lost. Geneticists now have access to well-preserved remains, including tissue samples that may contain extractable DNA. And in Yakutia, a cutting-edge cloning lab is reportedly working on exactly that, using this genetic material to potentially bring Stella's sea cow back. It may sound like science fiction, but with modern cloning techniques advancing quickly, the return of this peaceful ocean giant might just be closer than we think. Woolly rhinoceros. While mammoths are the most famous creatures from the icy world of the Pleistocene, they weren't alone. Woolly rhinoceroses also roamed the frozen Arctic landscape, with their thick fur helping them survive brutal cold temperatures. Sadly, climate shifts, competition with other animals, and pressure from early humans led to their extinction. Luckily, their remains are exceptionally well preserved, allowing scientists to access their DNA. With the right funding and technology, we may soon see a Sumatran rhino carrying the woolly rhino's genetic material. Neanderthal. It's no joke. Scientists really believe that Neanderthals, the ancient humans who went extinct around 40,000 years ago, could one day return to our planet. The project aimed at reviving Neanderthals might be one of the most fascinating and controversial scientific endeavors out there. Although it raises significant ethical concerns, it's already been proven that Neanderthals are not the direct ancestors of modern humans. In fact, geneticists now have the possibility to create a new, intelligent being. However, this idea is still theoretical for now. We don't have the technology or the know-how to do it yet. That said, researchers from Germany's Max Planck Institute are pushing the boundaries by working on creating a miniature Neanderthal brain. This doesn't mean they'll literally grow a brain, but the goal is to implant Neanderthal genes into the human genome, using stem cells to conduct the experiment. While it might sound strange, this research could help scientists understand the differences in how Neanderthals and Cro-Magnons, early modern humans, thought. Who knows? This might even bring us closer to one day cloning our ancient ancestors. Gastric brooding frog. To bring an extinct animal back to life, scientists need to clone it, and that means finding the most intact DNA possible. That's why species that disappeared more recently have a much better chance of being revived. One fascinating example is the gastric brooding frog. This bizarre little amphibian had a truly unique way of raising its young. The mother would actually carry the eggs in her stomach, and when the baby frogs were ready, they'd hop out of her mouth, kind of like a weird reverse kangaroo, but with more slime. Unfortunately, these frogs went extinct in the mid-1980s, and no one knows exactly why. Some scientists blame environmental issues in their native habitat, while others think it could have been natural problems within the species itself. Either way, they're gone, and that's a huge loss for science. But here's the hopeful part. Back in the 1970s, researchers preserved tissue samples from the frogs, and now, decades later, those samples are being used in efforts to bring the species back. So far, scientists have managed to create living embryos, a major step forward. It's still too early to say when, or if, we'll see these frogs alive and hopping again, but the science is moving in the right direction. When it comes to bringing extinct animals back to life, progress is slow, careful, and incredibly complex. But with time and patience, even the strangest species might one day return. And it's time to say goodbye. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss out our next video. Thanks for watching.